I'm John Mackenzie. Coming up on Football Today.
Chris and Colin Weir have suddenly become one of Britain's richest couples after scooping a record £161 million in the Euromillions lottery.
Thistle had some good news this week. Euromillions winner Colin Weir completed his takeover of the Jags. He will then give his 55% shareholding to a fan group, which should happen in early 2020.
It's important that it's done right, because with great wealth comes great responsibility.
Last week, it was announced that Euromillions jackpot winner Colin Weir had been successful in his bid to buy a majority share in Scottish club Partick Thistle. Surprisingly though, the news came out that he was giving his share, free of charge, to a supporters group. In this episode, we ask, how did Partick Thistle win the lottery?
Thistle fans have quite literally won the lottery here. It's a very surprising turn of events.
James Cairney is a journalist with Herald and Times Sport and a Partick Thistle supporter.
To be honest, it's the sort of thing that you think when you're growing up, like, oh, if I won the lottery, that's what I would do. And it's incredible to see that it's actually came to fruition and someone has actually done that. It's quite remarkable.
When did you first hear about Colin Weir's involvement in Thistle?
He was first involved back around 2013. He was helping out with some of the infrastructure at the club. I think it's important to just make a quick distinction early on that he wasn't ploughing money into the transfer budget and wage budget or anything like that. It was much more behind the scenes infrastructure projects, such as funding the youth academy and ensuring the club erased its debt that it used to have. It started at around £2 million. And over a gradual process, he helped to wipe that out. I mean, we've even gone as far as the main stand at Firhill, our stadium, is now called the Colin Weir stand. He's been huge for us. Without him, Thistle would be a very different club.
The story obviously begins much earlier than this year. It goes back to 2011.
It's a staggering amount of money to be landed with. Together, Colin and Chris Weir are now worth £161,653,000 after scooping the biggest lottery prize Europe has ever seen.
They won £161 million, which is obviously a massive, life-changing sum of money.
It is rather hard to imagine, but here's what it looks like. £161 million coins laid side by side would reach from Largs to Marrakesh. Piled on top of one another, they would pass the International Space Station and reach 509 kilometres above the Earth.
In terms of how he's used his money, he's not been shy about giving it to causes that are close to his heart and trying to advance their interests as best he can. He set up the Weir Trust, which I think to date that's given out around £5 million to community-based projects and that kind of thing. He's also donated, I think it's about £3 million to the SNP, particularly during the independence campaign back in 2014.
So at what point then does he start putting money into Thistle?
It took a couple of years until Colin got involved with Partick Thistle in a semi-official capacity, but the main focus of his investment was always going to be the Youth Academy, which again is now named after him. It's now the Thistle Weir Youth Academy. Without his funding, it would have been a shadow of what it currently is. In recent years, we've actually developed a few really exciting young prospects. We've got the likes of Aidan Fitzpatrick, who's just signed for Norwich in the summer for about £1 million once add-ons are taken into consideration. You've got Liam Lindsay, who's now at Stoke, I believe. He started at Partick Thistle. And there's a number of young players as well who are breaking into the first team. So that level of investment and funding into the Youth Academy is already paying dividends. And to be honest, if he was looking to make his money back, which he is not, the sales of Liam Lindsay and Aidan Fitzpatrick alone would have almost recouped that investment.
So Colin Weir has just won £161 million in the lottery. He's put £2.5 million into the club and has promised £6 million more. But then, earlier this year, he suddenly pulls out and claims he won't be putting any more money in.
It was a period of great uncertainty for Thistle. Essentially, it sounds ridiculous given who we are, but there was a billionaire consortium that were interested in taking over Partick Thistle, which at first sounds great. But then when you dig into the detail, it actually looked a little bit more worrisome than that. They're a company called New City Capital. They're fronted by Xian Li, and they already own Nice in Ligue 1, and they own English Championship side Barnsley.
Thank you very much for coming in today, and we are very excited to announce we are finalized the transaction to invest to Barnsley.
Now, the problem was that Weir felt he didn't trust, essentially, the new board's vision. He wasn't utterly convinced of what they had the club's best interests at heart. There were plenty of rumours abounding that the New City Consortium didn't have any real ambition whatsoever. They were happy with Thistle being exactly where we were. The land purchase as well was really crucial because, say you're a Partick Thistle fan, you wonder, what on earth are a billionaire consortium interested in Partick Thistle for? Well, we've got land in the west end of Glasgow, which is valuable. A lot of Thistle fans were very concerned with the idea that this consortium could simply buy the club, which owns the remainder of the land, and then Firhill could get, say, demolished and turned it into student flats, a shopping centre, whatever you'd like. It was a very nervous time to be a Thistle fan because everywhere you looked, everything was going wrong. There was no certainty anywhere. It was a deeply distressing time. And as a result, Weir decided to pull his funding from the club. That meant that the youth academy was no longer funded. It meant that the training ground was put on hold indefinitely. And it was worrying for a Partick Thistle fan because at that time we were managed by Gary Caldwell, who had genuinely done a terrible job at Thistle. The worry at the time was that he was really sort of pulling the heart out of the club. We had guys like Chris Doolan, Chris Erskine, Christy Elliott, who between them had about 27, 28 years of service at Thistle, and then all were let go unceremoniously. I mean, Chris Doolan in particular is one of the top scorers in Partick Thistle history.
Well, this was a superb goal. Lawless's touch was brilliant, and Doolan was something out of the ordinary.
It was his testimonial year and he was booted out unceremoniously. So there was a lot of bad feeling around the club at the time. We'd only just survived back-to-back relegations by the skin of our teeth the year before. And then the current season started. We started poorly. There seemed to be nothing going well on the pitch. It seemed a shambles in the back room. And it was a really concerning time. So I think it's understandable why Colin didn't want to invest all his money into a project where there was no certainty about the future of the club.
But then the following month, the fan group Thistle For Ever makes a bid for the ownership and a land holding as well, which is, surprise, surprise, backed by Weir. That was the first that we really got wind of it. And of course, you hear these things and you hope that, you know, I've always been a big fan of fan ownership. I think it's a great model. And when you hear something like that Colin Weir is planning to fund this fan group, but wants no say whatsoever in the day-to-day running of the club, and he wants to just transfer the shares over to fans immediately. That's something that, you know, it looks like a best case scenario. And it was weird because we really had two extreme proposals in front of us. We ever had one where it was going to be very much fan-led, community-led. And we had the other one where the fears were that we would simply be a feeder team for Barnsley. This brings us up to the present day then. So last week it was announced that the bid has been successful and Colin Weir is now, at least for a short period, the owner of Partick Thistle. What happens now? Weir has now got a majority stakeholding in Partick Thistle. He's promised that by the 30th of March 2020, he will transfer all of those shares over to a fan group, namely Thistle For Ever, for free, which is huge for the club. The cloud of uncertainty that was hanging over Firhill is now being lifted, it's dissipated, and with Weir, we now know that we've got someone who genuinely has the club's best interests at heart there. He's going to resume funding of the youth academy. He's said he's happy to, again, fund the training ground, the first in our history. All of a sudden, it's looking very rosy again. In the interim, Gary Caldwell, the manager who was deeply unpopular, has been sacked. He's been replaced by Ian McCall, who's done a fantastic job at Ayr United the last couple of seasons. And he's previously managed Partick Thistle. He's a bit of a fan favourite. Our previous manager, Alan Archibald, who was the one that guided us to that top six finish all those years ago, he's now back as his assistant.
So there's a lot to be really positive now about all of a sudden. Okay, we're still bottom of the league at the moment, at the time of recording, but there seems to be a structure in place and a plan, and crucially, there seems to be ambition, which is what any football club needs. That's the absolute basis of football, is the idea that we can get better. We want to improve on where we are at the moment. And under the opposing bid, I don't think that would have been the case.
After the break, we'll look at how Partick Thistle fits into the history of fan ownership in Scotland. If you like football content with a great blend of erudition and humour, look no further than the Beautiful Game podcast. It's a podcast that doesn't just focus on football results, they have entertaining topical debates and look to address social issues like discrimination and inequality, plus much more. They have gained great respect in the football fraternities with their polished views and the esteemed guests that they have welcomed onto their show. Darren Lewis, Kevin Lisby, Rob Harris, Miguel Delaney and West Ham United women's footballer Julia Simic are just a few of the personalities to have featured on their podcast. So if you're looking to be educated whilst also having a laugh, look no further than the Beautiful Game podcast. When we think of fan ownership in football, our minds naturally turn to Germany, but Scotland is not without its own examples.
Motherwell transferred to a fan ownership model a few years ago. To be honest, the results have been startling. They're part owned by the Well Society, who they're essentially fan representatives. It's about 8 or 9 fans who are, for the most part, they're elected. They make up the Well Society board, and 2 of those then sit on the club's executive board.
So explain to us a little bit about how the Wells Society model works.
In essence, they operate in the same way that any other owner do, in that they raise funds when needed. But most importantly, they've got a manifesto, I guess is what you'd call it, where they talk about how they want Motherwell to be run. First and foremost, they're ensuring that they've got a prudent approach, financially speaking. They don't want the club to fall into the wrong hands. They want to generate income through player sales. They want to develop their own young players.
And how's the fan ownership model been working for them?
So far, it's been working spectacularly. I mean, they're enjoying a great season. Their manager, Stephen Robinson, is brilliant.
To bridge the gulf sometimes between, the players that, other teams are able to sign and pay for. We have to do that with team spirit. We have to do that with camaraderie. And I've said all along, when we lose games, we lose together. When we win games, we win together. There's no single person or single player takes the credit for it. It's definitely a club thing, a team thing.
He's one of the names that's been linked right now to the Northern Ireland vacancy once Michael O'Neill leaves. There's a lot to be really positive about Motherwell at the moment. They've got a youth academy where they've got guys like Alan Campbell, who's only 20 years old, I believe, and yet he's already backed up 100 appearances for the club. He's playing very well for the Scotland under-21 side. You've got guys like Jake Hastie, who broke into the team last season, then got moved to Rangers. David Turnbull, who in his first season as a pro, he played about 30 games. He's a midfielder. He scored 15 goals and would have moved to Celtic in the summer for between £2.5 and £3 million had there not been an injury that had been noticed during his medical. So they've got a whole crop of promising young players. They play an exciting brand of football. They've got an excellent eye for talent from the English lower leagues. And generally, when they do sell players, they make a profit on them. In Scotland's Premiership, it's very rare that you see teams outside of Celtic, Rangers, pay fees for players. You're generally relying on Bosmans, free transfers and loans. So if you're a Motherwell and you can sign somebody like, say, Louis Moult, who then moves to Preston for about, I think it's £800,000, that's a hugely successful business model. And that's something that Motherwell seem to have a great knack of doing. When you look at Motherwell's wage bill, technically they should be doing a lot worse than they are. The likes of, obviously, Celtic, Rangers, Aberdeen, but even Hearts, Hibs, even Dundee United in the second tier have a higher wage budget than Motherwell. And yet they're managing to really punch above their weight, financially speaking. Right now, there's a lot of positivity around Fir Park.
Clearly it's worked out for the best then, but what was the initial response to the Motherwell takeover by fans in Scotland?
Well, to be honest, there was a bit of scepticism at the time. Not everyone was entirely sure it was the right way to go. But I think that Motherwell have provided an excellent example that other Scottish clubs can now follow, like Partick Thistle, for instance. There's very, very little downsides to what Motherwell have done. I mean, they're now debt-free. When they became a fan-owned club, they still had to pay their former owners about £1.5 million. As of the 1st of November this year, that fee has now been completely paid off. So they're now a debt-free club. They're ran by the fans. They play good football. They're doing well. They give youngsters a chance, and they're pushing for a European spot. I think for a club like Motherwell, you couldn't ask for much more.
Why do you think fan ownership is so prevalent in Scotland right now?
The reason that fan ownership has become a hot topic issue in Scotland is because of the numbers of teams that have faced administration or been liquidated since the turn of the century.
Rangers Football Club, one of the most famous in Britain, has announced it's gone into administration following an unsuccessful legal bid by Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs to appoint its own administrators.
Well, the club's chairman has revealed it could face disputed tax bills and penalties of up to £75 million. And Rangers will now...
I think there's been about a dozen or so cases since the year 2000 where a club has entered administration, and a few of those have resulted in the club going bust entirely. Teams like Clydebank, Gretna, who were doing fairly well. They've been around for a long time, and then all of a sudden we're gone. Particularly at the start of the noughties, Scotland had a real problem where clubs were overspending, they weren't living within their means, and it came back to haunt them. So now, having seen, particularly when you look at something like Rangers as well, it's obviously the most glaring example of a team that is so poorly mismanaged financially that they're eventually ran into the ground. So I think because of that, Scottish teams are very, very aware that they need to be financially sound, particularly fans. And that's why fan ownership is really beginning to take off, because fans, they've seen what happens when you don't take that approach, and it just inevitably leads to disaster.
When you talk about fan ownership, obviously you naturally end up thinking of Germany. But in Germany, we're seeing a gradual erosion of the fan ownership model as the Bundesliga is trying to keep up with the Joneses of the Champions League.
Many people believe scrapping the 50+1 rule would make things more interesting in the Bundesliga. What if clubs weren't forced, for financial reasons, to lose their best players to the bigger clubs?
To what extent do you think that fan ownership is working well in Scotland, precisely because it isn't quite at the same level, the hyper-moneyed level of elite football?
When you look to Germany, you've got the likes of the Bayern chairman, Karl-Heinz Rummenigge. Like, he wants to get rid of the 50+1 rule because obviously he wants to keep pace with the likes of, your Chelsea's, your Manchester United's, Real Madrid's, Barcelona, Juventus. Whereas in Scotland, there's not that same pressure. Celtic and Rangers, yes, they are looking to push on in Europe. They want to reach the group stages of the Champions League. They want to reach the knockout stages of the Champions League or the Europa League. They've got the finances to do that. But for the rest of Scottish football, European football is frankly an afterthought. It's been a long time since a team outside of Celtic and Rangers made it through the qualifying rounds of European football. I think the last team to do it was Aberdeen in 2007. So there's been a long history of teams. They'll give it a go in the qualifiers, but generally speaking, they rarely manage to give a good account of themselves and reach the tournament proper. So I think because of that, there's a lot more focus on Scottish football. It's sort of in its own little ecosystem. It's in its own wee bubble, where if you're a Scottish football fan, it's brilliant because there's lots going on and it's a bit mad, it's a bit daft, and it's a bit surreal. But when you look at European football, yes, obviously teams like Aberdeen, Hibs, Hearts, Motherwell, they all want to do well in Europe. But given the resources they've got available to them, it's very difficult to match their opposition, especially when they're generally unseeded. So in that instance, I think that the fan ownership model is attractive because if we're just looking at pure domestic football, which most of Scottish football are, it's a very sensible way to run a club. If you want to be, invested in, and so you can then push on in Europe, I can see why people would be reluctant to adopt the fan ownership model.
How do you feel about the possibility of Thistle reproducing the Welsh Society model?
The Welsh Society model has proven to be a success. I think there's quite a few clubs in Scotland are now looking at that rather enviously. I think it's a very sensible and ultimately rewarding way for fans to be involved with the club, because it really creates a dynamic between the club itself and the fan group and creates a discussion and a dialogue that can only be to the club's benefit. Crucially, the thing that's very important about the Welsh Society model is that they have got fan representatives on the board itself, actually able to give the fans perspective on issues that will ultimately affect how the club is ran. That's huge. Of course, the other crucial point, though, there's a crucial distinction between what Thistle will end up with and the Welsh Society model, and that is that when Colin Weir transfers his shares over, he's not asking for any money for them. That will be free. Motherwell did have to pay about £1.5 million to get their club. They still own the previous owner's debt. This will not be the case with Thistle. It's truly a blank slate in order to do with the club what we want to do with it. And that's huge.
So how do you feel about the future? I'm getting the impression that you're feeling fairly sanguine about it.
I'm pretty pleased, to be honest. I'm optimistic. Between the two options that we had, between the two takeover bids, I, for one, am overwhelmingly in favour of this one. I think the idea that we can now control our land, we'll have full possession of the stadium, so we don't have to worry about losing it. We'll have a youth academy again, which has been creating genuinely good footballers, good prospects, who can contribute to the first team, even at the ages of 18, 17 sometimes. Most importantly, the fans have a huge say over the running of the club, and ultimately they're the people that are best placed to do that.
James Cairney is a journalist with Herald and Times Sport. This episode was produced by Josh Schneiderweiler. I'm John Mackenzie. Thanks for listening to Football Today. If you enjoyed this episode, why not rate us and review us on iTunes and recommend us to a friend? See you next time.